Hello and welcome to another episode of the In Focus podcast. I'm your host, G. Sampath. And today we are going to be talking about the most important problem facing the nation, which is basically stand up comedians and the jokes they make. Recently, a stand up comedy named Kunal Kamra, who is fairly well known for his work, he released a video and he gave a performance at the Habitat Comedy Club in Bombay where he made certain remarks. Basically, some months ago, politician A called politician B a gaddar. When that happened, the supporters of politician B did not seem to have any problem with it. And when Kunal Kamra repeated the same comments at the Habitat Comedy Club, the supporters of politician B went berserk. They tore down the venue, and the Bombay municipality, the BMC, also got into the act, demolishing sections of that building which it claims were illegal structures, quote unquote. And then the Maharashtra government has now threatened to freeze Kunal Kamra's bank accounts. And Kamra has also been fielding a number of, hundreds of calls from people or supporters of this politician who have threatened him, threatened to beat him up. Some even wanting to know from him some ideas on how they can reach him in Tamil Nadu so that they can beat him up, which in itself became a very viral kind of an audio release. And despite all this, interestingly enough, and pretty rarely for the Indian media ecosystem, Kamra has said he will not apologize and that he's not afraid of the mob. And this is at a time when both the Chief Minister and the Deputy Chief Minister of Maharashtra have demanded an apology from Kamra. Now, this incident has been all over the newspapers and the TV channels, and it raises a lot of interesting questions. And joining me today to discuss them is another brilliant stand-up comedian whose specialty also happens to be political humor, Punit Pania. Welcome to the pod.
Hello, Namaste. Thank you for having me. I must say at the outset that it's very brave of you to sport so many books in your background because that too soon might not be legal in this country.
Yes, I didn't really think about that. Thank you for flagging it. Maybe next time I'll replace them with some certain colors of flags or something. I don't know what, but I'll
Yeah,
I'll think
some
about
religious
that.
scriptures in there for good measure.
Yes. So, Puneet, I'm so glad you could make time for this podcast to discuss something which I think has shaken, so to speak, the stand-up community, at least, if not created a lot of, I don't know, at least generated a lot of content for all the other content creators in the business. Now, both the Chief Minister and the Deputy Chief Minister of Maharashtra, I mean, major functionaries with constitutional responsibilities, they have tried to justify the vandalization of the Habitat Comedy Club, the venue where Kamra performed, by saying, they have said, quote, I quote, there is a limit to free speech and every action has a reaction. Okay, so this kind of of a sentiment, was it always there in India, where we as a nation always okay with politicians and their followers setting the limits of free speech, or is this something new? But I want to hear your comment on this because you've been someone who's been in the field of political comedy for a long time. When do you date our slide into where we are today, if it is indeed a slide when it comes to political jokes?
I think we always been this way. In fact, I would say it is very magnanimous of the politicians to at least offer an explanation about what has happened because they don't need to. They support those people who vote for them. The core voter base is absolutely okay with medieval justice. So they don't even need to pay lip service to the fact that this is a reaction, it's emotional outburst from our karyakartas. I don't condone this action, but उतना भी बोलने का जरूरत नहीं है वो लोग करता है तो आई थिंक इट इज वो उनका बड़प्पन है इतना भी बोल रहा है तो they can get away with just being absolutely brazen like say Yogi does, and eventually they will because the playbook is the same. The bulldozer action, the absolute lawlessness with which they operate, absolute lack of procedure, they flaunted in fact as their ammo. So I think we should be very grateful that they are being polite in a way, and
Well,
it's all. Yeah.
I'm not sure I should take you at your word here. I mean, you spoke about the bulldozer action. Puneet. That's very interesting because we have seen these bulldozer demolitions happening, especially with regard to the buildings of certain community members, which really hasn't raised the kind of you know. Uh, talk, so to speak, or outrage which the raising or the demolition, partial demolition, let us say, of this Habitat Comedy Club has raised. I mean, how do you see this kind of dichotomy?
So we are an unequal society, in all terms, in terms of class, caste, and religion. So who the victim is really matters in terms of how much we outrage on it. So if in a major city, a very prominent club where performers who also cater to a largely upper class audience perform, when that gets taken down within a day, very hard handedly, of course it becomes bigger news than if in a small town a minority's house is raised to the ground for whatever involvement in riots or whatever be the case. Sometimes the charges are so frivolous, often the charges get proven absolutely false, but after 2 years, when the family's life is already destroyed. And besides all of this, the law of the land doesn't permit you to take down property like that, but they still do it. It's utter lawlessness. And it's been normalized to an extent because even people who claim to be liberal don't see everybody as equal in the country.
I mean, that's a big comment to make. I mean, how do we say that people who claim to be liberal don't see everybody as equal? I mean, liberalism is supposedly an ideology that values
So I
individuality.
think there are two facets to this. One is that we have to realize that the world doesn't end overnight. It ends on a particular day for a particular family or a community. You imagine somebody living in a small town and they have a small tenement or a small house, and the state comes and just takes it down because one member of the family was seen at some place where something happened. Is that not equal tragedy at least than what happened to our club? And I'm saying it fully aware of how much it impacts me and other comics in Mumbai also, and actually around the country because we all used to perform there. So I think the gravity of the tragedy is you can't compare the two, but they're at least equal. No. Yet you don't see the same amount of airspace being dedicated to it, neither online nor on television. So I'm not saying it's a conscious choice not to look at it. I'm just saying subconsciously we don't consider every citizen as being equally worthy of an outrage. And because we let the earlier demolition slide, now it is at your door and you can't do anything about it.
Right. Now, Puneet, you made a reference earlier about how this entire incident has affected your community, which is stand-up
Yeah.
comedians,
So,
and also,
sorry, yes, sorry to, I forgot the second point I want to make was also, uh, I think just from pure point of view of bandwidth, there is so much happening in the country that I don't expect everyone to outrage equally on everything that happens. But over the years, you've seen enough incidents and you let it become normalized so that now when it comes to even the biggest city in the country, nothing can be done about it. Sorry, I want to just add that to what I said
no,
earlier.
no, no worries. I mean, I was going
Yeah.
to ask you about the impact of this incident on the stand-up community because you said this is a tragedy, but it's, of course, it's nothing compared to the tragedy which has been unfolding in remote towns and villages where members of a particular community's house they have it. When the state comes and demolishes it. This, despite the Supreme Court's sort of statements on how this is not in keeping with the constitution and so forth. So comedy and political satire, especially, it's a global business as of today. When everybody knows about the Colbert report, for instance, which is like one of the gold standards of political satire, and it's got a huge following. It's a successful business, and you've been in this industry for a long time. So how do you see the impact of not just the Kamra episode we are talking about here, but also all the leading incidents in the lead up to it, Munawar, Faruqi, and so many others. How do you see this kind of reaction impacting the stand-up comedy industry, and has it sort of is it pushing? What are the stand-up comedians who are into political satire thinking? Are they going to now branch off into romantic comedy or I don't know something else which is less controversial? And what happens to the things we talk about ease of doing business when you have torn down a business venue? At the end of the day, it's a business.
yeah,
So, what are
yeah.
your thoughts on this?
I think at the outset it's important to mention that we are nothing like what the US is in terms of free speech. So they have absolute free speech, which is part of the First Amendment, and no one can touch that. And we don't have that even in our constitution that we very proudly brandish. So even in the letter, the law
Oh,
doesn't
I
support you
think
completely.
the free speech is being watered down by the Trump administration, especially if you look at the
Yeah.
university campuses.
Yes. Yes. So
Sorry.
now that again is the executive like overreach in a way. But in the letter of the law, he can't change it. So then people can always fight it in the courts in the US. Here, the first point is that freedom of speech complete nahi hai. And in terms of the effect on the comedy scene, Habitat was the most prominent venue in the country. And they were doing multiple shows every day where everybody from the newer comics to someone as big as Veer Das would perform every now and then. We also record our sets there, which is why the whole thing happened. So it's a very important venue in terms of honing new material and then recording and presenting it to the outside world. Of course, you can shoot elsewhere as well, but Habitat was amongst the best. So it's also symbolic in a way. For the audience, it has become a landmark in the city. Like almost every show, you would see some people who are just visiting Mumbai and they come to see. It's almost like SL World जाने का, Gateway जाने का है, और Habitat जाने का है. So it has become like a trip advisor, five things to do kind of a thing. So it was that big. And it was that big for some time now. But with Samay's show Latent, it also got cancelled. It shot to even more prominence. So to take that venue down so brutally and in just like a day definitely impacts the industry and also sends a message out, that you have to stay in your place. You can do a little bit of Santa Banta jokes or whatever you want, but उसके आगे बोलने का नहीं. And although in this particular case, it seems to be no one man's ego that has triggered the whole response, but it's so nicely fits into the overall establishment's POV and their ammo as well. So it is all great for them. Plus, not to mention above and all of the other issues, is also a great distraction. I mean, as grave as it is for someone like me and other performers, and again, we need to point out it's not only comedians, a lot of musicians, poets, storytellers, and even plays used to happen at Habitat. Now, all of them are without a place to perform at or record at. So, I'm saying that while it is grave for us, but there are so many other issues that deserve the limelight just in the state of Maharashtra. Your farmer suicides are reaching 9 a day is the average apparently over the last couple of months. And the Ladki Bahin Yojana, which seems to have helped them secure a major mandate in the recent elections, is already watered down. It seems that now they're going to almost take it out or like cut it down to size because the state, as industrious as the state is still intact. So there are far bigger issues to be discussed. In the very city of Mumbai, it looks like a war zone for a couple of years now. Almost every street is dug up. Uh, Pollution, air pollution, which was not a problem till 2 years back, is now a persistent problem.
Right.
With
Well, but then I think we agreed right at the beginning that the biggest problem facing Maharashtra and India today is
yeah,
stand-up
but
comedians' joke.
it's yes,
So
yes,
I think that's how it's going to go
yeah,
in this country for the time being, at least. So Puneet, you mentioned about Samay Raina, the whole beer biceps show, which also led to a lot of controversy, and
yeah.
we had to apologize and so on. But we didn't see anybody come and tear down the venue when that happened. But in this case, within hours, it's a completely different kind of a reaction. Like, why? How this? How do you explain this difference in terms of the extremity of the reaction to similar kind of shows?
I would say it is surprising. The severity of the attack is surprising. It's not that it's not happened before. There's been vandalism right from the time when Canvas Laugh Club used to be there in Mumbai. and Habitat itself has faced multiple vandalism attempts and actual violence as well, but never to this extent. And then to be immediately followed almost in tandem with BMC action and being discussed in Parliament. This is never happened before. So in that way, it is surprising. With Samay show, from my experience, there was also, I would say, organic outrage. There were people who are genuinely not liking the show in general and what happened with Ranveer in that particular episode. So I could see that there was outrage as well in the general public. This time it seems as just the party and its ecosystem that is largely enraged. The public at large seems to be dumbfounded by what they see on the screen, or they're indifferent, or they're supporting Kamra. So I don't think public sentiment is with them at all at this point, and yet they go through with the action because here a particular minister has been enraged. So that's kind of different from the earlier issue. It was about general morality, and there was no one particular
How
person.
wasn't he enraged when Ajit Pawar made the same comment, man? And a few
So
others are not Ajit Pawar. I mean, isn't he of someone of far higher importance in the political scheme of things than a comedian? I mean, many would hold that view.
see, every profession has its own moral code, including thieves. So in India, there is complete freedom of expression if you're a politician, but a different set of rules apply to the common person. And you see this time and again that politicians not only get away with outright hate speech and calls to violence, but they say the nastiest things about each other. They also slander, they make outrageous allegations which would immediately be grounds for a defamation case, but you hardly ever see that happening. It almost seems like they have a different playbook that they go by when it comes to each other, whereas for the general public, they have to stay in their lane. I think this has been observed like since forever,
Right. So,
and to the point that even the people understand कि ये हमारा औकात इतना ही है, ये लोग कुछ भी बोल सकते हैं, अपने को नहीं बोलने का.
great. I mean, that's, I think, a very, I think, strong and I think a very useful sort of benchmark to sort of understand this phenomenon. You said there is complete freedom of speech only for politicians, and I would add perhaps those spokespersons or media personalities blessed by politicians. I think they have a complete freedom of
Yeah,
speech,
yeah,
and the rest will have to, as you said, stay in their lane. And now Kunal Kamra, I think the essence of his entire show was a refusal to stay in his lane, so to speak. And
yeah,
despite a demand for an apology from the most powerful person in the state, uh, and like more than 500 calls threatening to beat him up and so on, threats to freeze his bank accounts. Despite all of this, he has issued a statement saying, "I'm not going to apologize.
yeah.
I'm not, afraid of the mob." Now, do you think this kind of defiance, it could? I mean, how do you see this? Do you think it could inspire maybe a larger a wave of courageous defiance among other comedians or content creators, or is it just the exception that proves the rule of being generally uh,
Yeah.
being
I
keeping
think
erring within the lines, so to speak?
is such exceptional bravery that I think people in power have also been put off a bit by the absolute defiance of the man because they've gone after him multiple times before, including with the Arnab case and even since then. But never has there been such a head-on collision before. They randomly accused him of being anti-Hindu and anti whatever they new terms they dream up with, but they had no substance in those. They would get the local goons to go and get his shows cancelled. But in this case, they think they got him because they will pin him down to a particular reference to a particular person, although he didn't name the person in question. But his defiance has been so exemplary so far. I think people are noticing across the divide. Whether it will inspire other comedians or not, I don't think so because there is so much to lose the moment you start doing anything socially or politically relevant in our country as an individual. And Kamra has already paid that price. He continues to pay that price. All of us pay that price. Anybody who touches any topic which is socially or politically relevant. And he does this knowing full well the consequences. And of course, that's why part of the reason, at least, why he shifted to Tamil Nadu where he stays now. Because otherwise, even if the state doesn't do it themselves, their goons will come and get you. And then somebody will say कि ये तो कार्यकर्ता की भावना थी and your history. So he's a smart chap as well, because if you're going to take on the biggest people in power, at least you have to have some groundwork done, which he has done. Which is why he's able to do this. He doesn't rely on stand up for his livelihood, and that's the first thing that you have to let go of, because no, they will go after you in all ways that
He
they can.
doesn't rely on a stand-up for his livelihood. Okay, I didn't know that. Okay.
He's worked in corporate for a decade, and no, he's made a name for himself in the advertising industry. Very few people know this before stand up, and he's made some of his money there, and even otherwise, he's constantly looking for something else to fall back on monetarily, right? Because in his case, so physically he can't perform in many states of the country,
But
including
do you,
some
do
of
you
the.
think he can any venue in India, maybe outside Tamil Nadu? I don't know about Tamil Nadu either. There is a pretty vocal sort of band of supporters from the same side of the political spectrum as the
Yeah.
Maharashtra one. So, do you think do you think he can perform? Will any venue in India agree to host him? Number one, and number two, will anybody want to be associated with Kunal Kamra as an entertainment person, as an if somebody is organizing these kinds of shows or as a business, wouldn't they fear the repercussions of being associated with someone like Kunal Kamra now that so much has happened? So, do you think these two are perhaps the biggest costs that he will have to pay, or do you think there will still be people and venues who will be ready to share the cost, so to speak, with him?
So this is a fate he already suffers for years now, that he can't perform in any BJP ruled state. He could do Mumbai till now, but now he can't even do anything in Maharashtra anywhere. Karnataka he can do now, Bangalore largely because BJP is not there anymore. So these very few pockets are left for him to do a public show. Uh, Other than public show, there are sometimes corporate events or say private gatherings or like invitee only shows. Those might still happen, but not without risk. So then beyond this, brands will not want anything to do with you. A lot of comedians make money through brand work, and brand work could mean selling a product, or it could also mean, say, being on a Netflix or an Amazon for some show or some format, which I don't see happening now for him. It's not happened in the past also, barring one or two instances. और अभी तो नहीं होगा. Of course, he dies down after a while, then some work might start coming in, but there is always a price to pay, and that is true for all of us who pursue political comedy. Uh, but that is just the fiscal price to pay. Emotionally, you can't imagine what toll it takes on a person. Somehow, he managed to keep the same phone number he had 10 years back, and the threat calls just keep coming almost every day. Now there will be a spike because of the incident, but even in general, they keep coming. And as you would have heard of a recording of his that came online of the goons asking him kahan pe baitha hai, and he says, "Aa jao tum." He's that chill now, but I think he's just gotten used to it. Like, can any human being stay that calm if you're being threatened every day by a random person, like ringing on your phone? And of course, there must be messages and like all sorts of threats coming in. There are comedians across the country who have got into some trouble for, say, for example, having a joke on a particular film star. And years after that incident, they still get random threat calls from their film star's rabid fans. तो अगर वो फिल्म स्टार के लिए ऐसा हो सकता है, तो इन दिस केस व्हेन ही इज वन आफ्टर द एंटायर स्टेट as an entity, uh, you can only imagine the volume of threats that he gets on his phone. So there's a huge price to pay.
I
And
think the only sort of target of political humor, which I think would be perhaps 100% safe for political stand-up comedians would be to make jokes on Rahul Gandhi. I think that seems to
Yeah,
be the only.
yeah, yeah. And there is one of the few arguments that they have is that all of the arguments largely come down to whataboutery. But one of the arguments is that you guys only joke on the center. What about the state governments who are equally draconian? Or the Congress? The thing is, the standard wasn't around for more than say 12 years in its current form in the country. But in the few years that Congress was in power, I remember comics going hammer and tong after them, including some very personal remarks on, say, Sonia, Rahul, and particularly the Prime Minister then, Mr. Manmohan Singh. So it's all out there in the public domain. It's just that the problem is that no debate is neither balanced nor it is evenly matched, no, because the noise is so much from the center and the straight backed outfits that just simply by volume they sort of overwhelm the senses of the public at large. So there is enough and more examples of comics having done the same to the previous regime, and not to speak of the fact that you always speak truth to power and you punch up, and not down. Of course, that doesn't resolve, say, party like the TMC and the DMK from whatever they may be doing in their own states. But the point is that what the center does is way more prominent and it affects us way more in terms of policy than, say, a distant state does in our life. So if something comes to our notice, we do talk about it. But this is the same what about it that lets them get away with everything else. कि हाँ ठीक है हम लोग चलाया बुलडोजर पर वो उधर डीएमके भी ऐसा किया ठीक है हम लोग मस्जिद तोड़ा पर पता है 300 साल पहले वो लोग मंदिर भी तोड़ा था एंड the dumbness of the argument is only covered by the loudness of it. So
Yeah.
even right now, if you see across the board, whoever speaks for the government, they have many spokespersons, official and unofficial, and they all say the same thing. Ki Kamra, during Kangna's time, he was gloating, which is true. But just by repeating that,
Kamra
you
during
don't get.
Kangna's time did what?
So when the earlier government was in power in Maharashtra, the Uddhav led Sena with the NCP. Kangana, being the BJP girl that she is, she kept on attacking the Uddhav government through the Sushant Singh Rajput case angle. And to the point that she would make the most outrageous statement like saying that Mumbai is POK and the stuff, just to get a reaction maybe. So what the Sena did at that time was that they used the BMC to take down her office in Mumbai, which they claimed was illegal, in very similar fashion to now. And soon after that, Kamra was seen gloating and celebrating over what had happened. And in a podcast with Sanjay Raut, who was part of the ruling party at that time, also they sort of celebrated what had happened to Kangana. And even when it was happening, I thought that this is going to come and bite them in the ass because it's just not right. We may not agree with them politically, but such clearly motivated action should not be supported, let alone be celebrated. So they are using that now to say ki tabhi to you are happy now that the shoe on the other foot, now you're crying. So it's a fair argument, but can you justify the vandalism and then with this whataboutery, you can keep being absolute lawless, till forever. Right? This argument extends till forever. Like when you point out some very clear charges of corruption and absolute malfeasance, or even just incompetence, they say that 70 years Congress ruled and they did this and they did that. Does that mean that for 70 years we have to stay quiet now?
Great.
No, it
So,
is
Punit,
such a dumb argument.
coming to something else you said earlier in the pod, you said that there was some kind of an organic outrage with Kunal's comments, and many people didn't like it. But the essence of constitutional protection for free speech is that it's not that if you like somebody's comments, that is protected, that's fine, you can say it. But if you don't like it, that's not allowed, right? Even if the freedom of speech needs protection precisely when somebody says something that powerful people do not like. Do you think Indians do not understand this basic concept of free speech, or do you think there is something deeper in terms of a personality, a deep rooted Indian personality trait which cannot take a joke at all. I mean, is it that, or is it they don't understand how freedom of speech works? It only works when somebody says something you do not like, and you have to take it. When it's not enough to say, okay, I like what he says. That's great, right? I mean,
Yeah.
do you think Indians understand this?
I think we never really understood this completely. But just to sort of clarify what I said earlier, was organic outrage I felt was there in the latent case with Ranveer, but
Okay,
not in the current case with Kamra. Because no,
okay.
because we put out content ourselves, we do live sessions, we meet people, so no, we get a lot of live feedback from the audience, and I could see that people who generally also like stand up or say follow my work or other comedians work were also generally they were very outraged at what happened on Samay show. So at that time, it seemed that if the state wanted to take some big action, no, in that momentum of that outrage, they could have, but they didn't. But in this case, they did. So, of course, like I said earlier, also in this case, there's a particular politician who thinks that he has been named and he's angry. So that is one difference. Other
Is he
big
angry
difference.
or is he afraid? Is it anger or is it fear?
That's a great point. I think I'll come back to that once I finish what I was saying. I think in the latent case, there were two big reasons why they did not press ahead with major action. One was that Ranveer was involved, and he is one of them clearly. And not only has he received major sponsorships from the government to do podcasts of all the ministers to humanize them before the Lok Sabha elections, he's also received an award from the Prime Minister himself, as whatever social media influencer, whatever that award was. Now, that video would haunt them forever if they took any criminal action against Ranveer. And I think that is probably the single biggest reason why they did not go ahead as hard as they might have otherwise. That's one. And other is, as lewd as the show was, I think the establishment would be happy with a show like that. Why would they not welcome a regular, massive, new source of distraction that raises no political or socially relevant issue? Is great for them. Like that show was maybe single-handedly doing for them what multiple news channels might be able to, which is distraction and keep people entertained. Basically,
Some
no
people
matter
would argue
how.
that show sort of undermined the publicly proclaimed values of the right wing ecosystem, family values, for instance. It sort of is challenging that with the kind of joke that was made, and therefore
I
they're angry, etc.
which happened when no Ranveer crossed like some line. But in general, do you really think people in power care for family values? They will care for whatever keeps them in power. Otherwise, they wouldn't let films like Animal come out. And Animal was largely even celebrated by the right wing. It's, I mean, apart from him avenging his father, what other family values do you see there? And even the avenging part is not lawful. So I don't think they really care about any values, any religion, also for that matter. They do whatever is convenient for them in the here and now. And the thing is that with latent, it was against, say, conservative values, but it was not really for the liberal values, I would say, because many of the jokes would punch down. Many of the jokes was you would see not only jokes, just the general atmosphere. Largely, it would you say you could say it was sexist, it was misogynist, uh, and just generally unaware of the social realities of the country. It's just this sort of dank meme culture where you say something which is mean just for the sake of it, without knowing the depths of what that means. So I think that way the establishment would have had no problem with the show going on for longer.
What you call meanness, I think in their heads as performers, I think they are thinking of this subgenre of edgy comedy called a roast. They are roasting whoever. But I think the distinction between a roast, which is actually a good roast, which sort of fulfills certain norms of what
Yeah,
constitutes a good
a
example
roast.
of
Yeah.
perform is different from straightforward meanness.
So, like, say someone when someone like me or Daniel or even Kamra will do a dark joke, there will be underlying social reality we want to point out at. Or still at the end of it, the joke will be on somebody in power. But then to say just joke on say poor children dying, or that's just for shock value, or it's almost like the kids feel like no, they're more manly, or they feel like no, the word is sigma, that see I could be this mean and get away with it. There is no payoff, and there is no depth, and there is no meaning to the jokes, which is also okay in meme culture, I guess. But for a country like India, where, like you rightly said, people think insult is equal to roast, usme, this is, is quite dangerous if it gets out of hand. And it was in a way. So I think that's the big difference between the two. One is the man accused himself, which is Ranveer, and the other is that the show was not really pinching them politically, whereas this one directly did. And I think the point you made about fear is very true. Uh, we are a medieval society which has just put on a costume of democracy. So most of our leaders, if not all, are not really contributing members of society. They are local strongmen who over the years have risen to state or national level of prominence. All of them are Bahubalis in some way. And a Bahubali works on fear. It does, and that fear somehow gives him respect. It doesn't give him reverence, which the leader knows himself. So the flip side to that is that even the slightest poking in his image, be it from an innocuous joke also, may burst his bubble. And as a society, we are so used to being ruled over by dictators over the centuries that now, even if a well educated, generally nice person comes into the reckoning, we will not vote for him because we will feel कि ये क्या कर पाएगा. So in a pool of crocodiles, how will this charming prince survive? And he won't get the vote. So politicians are always in this sort of game of one-upmanship of who can be the bigger strong man. And in that game, this is just one more chapter.
Right. I mean, that's a very a big picture kind of interpretation of this entire phenomenon. Thank you for that, Punit. I mean, we're running out of time, so one
Yeah.
final question before we wrap up. I mean, towards the end of his show, this special which Kunal Kamra performed at the Habitat Comedy Club, he held up a copy of the Constitution of India. As you are a stand-up comedian who does political comedy, do you have faith in the Indian judiciary? Because ultimately it's up to the judiciary to sort of uphold the constitution. So, do you have that kind of faith, that assurance as a performer that it will back you so long as you practice your art within the remit of constitutionally correct? Whatever is your constitutional right, you stay within that and perform. The judiciary is there for you. Is that a sentiment you hold, or is that a sentiment which is shared at all by others?
I believe in the Constitution in the spirit that it espouses, but the judiciary will come much later. The damage will happen immediately. And by the time you get to the doors of the judiciary, I mean, there will not be much left to lose as a performer, as a citizen, as a business owner as well. They already take a toll on you before you even reach the station to write an FIR. In fact, in this case, the goons who vandalized wrote the FIR before anybody else could against them. So beyond that, the process of judicial justice system in our country itself is the punishment. So I would have to sadly say that I don't have a lot of faith in the system. I have faith in the constitution in the spirit that it aims to achieve. But we are decades, if not centuries, away from that as a country. So whatever we do it knowing full well the risks involved. It is an occupational hazard, to put it mildly. is this way. When you step out of the house in India, you know that you can get run over by any random car and nothing will happen to that person. You can fall into a pothole and you can't complain about it. Or you could get caught up in any kind of trouble, and the police will be your last resort in those situations. So, just like that, in this profession, when you go out on the stage and you say anything which is slightly political or social in nature, you run the gravest of risks. And we do it knowing full well, which is why there's very few of us still left who do it. Comics who don't do it or either stop doing it, you can't blame them because the risks are too high. People like Kamra do it knowing full well the risk involved, and he's already taken the hits financially and otherwise. So I wouldn't say that I have great faith in the system. When shit hits the fan, but you also have to understand structurally the country we are living in, and that doesn't resolve your issues, but at least it helps explain to you, the sad state that we are in, and it may not allay your worries, but at least it gives you some understanding of the larger picture. And the larger picture is this: that there is no middle class in the country. It's maybe 5% at best. These are the people who probably come for our shows, who may voice their opinion for or against us on the internet. The majority of the country is barely trying to make ends meet. So even if they go absolutely hammer and tongs behind a comedian or any private individual, I mean, just the shamefulness of the entire state machinery going after one citizen should by itself be enough to shake people out of the apathy, but it does not. Why? Because the majority of the country is just trying to fight for the next meal, and the government knows it. They use us for content. They don't. They are not really threatened by any of us. We are just sources of distraction for them. They'll go on for a few days, then they'll move on to the next thing or the next Mughal emperor that catches their fancy. So they can be absolutely barbaric in the way they treat us, and yet electorally nothing will happen to them because the majority can be swayed by some scheme that gives them a couple of thousand rupees a day, or just liquor is still being distributed a day before the polls. If that does not work, you have seen even voter suppression happening on the day of the polls. If that does not work after the polls, you can simply buy out the MLAs or the MPs. If that also does not work, you can later coerce them to joining your party. All of these options exist. So there is no incentive for the government to act in a civilized manner. We are a medieval society, and our justice system now also reflects that increasingly. So now, if besides or beyond knowing all this, we continue to do what we do, we'll only have to blame ourselves. There is no point pontificating or doing any grandstands. There is nobody is coming to save you, and if you see even Kamra, he doesn't expect support from anybody. People will still help him simply because of the magnitude of the battle he's taken on. But if you see, he is a lone warrior in this, and only people who like take on that sort of, I wouldn't say martyrdom, but that sort of danger on themselves will continue to do what we do, and there will be only a handful of people left, if at all, in the coming years. And people who still fight the good fight, despite knowing whatever I said, uh, they do it because not doing it is a huge affront to your dignity as a citizen. And this is a citizen that is dreamed of in the constitution, not the one that is fighting for his next meal right now. So you can't even grudge the people at large for being apathetic or even against what we do, because they just don't have the bandwidth to process what I just said, or they haven't had the opportunities in life to see the bigger picture. Which is why even if the AQI in the national capital, which is 1200, it still cannot become an election issue. So knowing that full well, we fight the good fight because somebody has to.
Right. I mean, that's a pretty brutal assessment, Puneet. I mean, what you said, two key points. One, of course, this kind of a violent reaction to somebody just showing up and doing their professional job
Yeah,
is an occupational hazard. And secondly, this sort of disparity between how the Constitution envisions the citizen as someone who is aware or pursues their rights, and the reality of the citizen as someone who is actually deeply sort of involved in just getting his or her next meal. I think this dichotomy between these two different versions of the citizen, I think this also, I think, plays an important role on why this kind of situation continues, where freedom of speech is sort of severely can be curtailed by any group of people who feel comfortable resorting to violence, often with state complicity. That's all I have for you in this episode, Punit. It was really nice talking to you. Thank you so much for joining us. Good luck. Thank you.
Thank you for having me.